afternoon, everyone. And of course, we have our illustrious Dr. Ruben Ward, the director of the National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare at Tuskegee University. Some of you wondering, how could Dr. Hyde just kind of run it off his lips? It took practice. It took practice. And if you look behind Dr. Warren's head, I'm reading it off the side. Behind him is the Sankofa bird, which is not only is it an image in Blackness, but it's also an image that is very profound in the Bioethics Honors Program, the National Bioethics Center, and the Tuskegee University. The notion of going back and fetch it. Never forget where we came from. Never forget where we came from. So today we invite you for another session for the Public Health Ethics Intensive, which is a subset of the commemoration, a week long of commemoration that is not a celebration, but is a commemoration and remembering of what took place between 1932 and 1972 in Macon County, Macon County, Alabama, when 623 men and their families were put through a hideous quasi-experiment. It was not an investigation, it was not an actual study, it was an attempt at humiliating. It was an attempt of being destructive because this was a vulnerable community. It wasn't a gullible community, it was a susceptible community. And as a result, these men went through some hideous atrocities. So today we come to commemorate, to remember. I was talking to somebody this morning, Dr. Warren, correct me if I'm wrong, but when our dear Jewish brothers and sisters talk about the Holocaust and what happened to them, is called remembering. When Blacks and Black Americans talk about slavery and what happened to us, is called reverse racism. So we want to make sure that it's clear and understood that we are not fighting against something that happened 400 years ago, but we are continually, like Star Trek said, we're in a continuing movement to try to right the inequities and the disparities that has happened, and it is happening to our community today. It's kind of sad situation that here it is, an international, a global pandemic, and those who are leading in deaths who are Black. Like, how in the world does a pandemic no color? How does a pandemic say, well, I'm gonna go after Black people today? And so 100 years ago, there was a pandemic that took out of millions of people on this planet Earth. Now we have another one. But there's another major movement 100 years ago, and it was called the Women's Suffragist movement, where women were marching to get the right to vote. So our commemoration of the men of the study and the commemoration of women on history comes together at this point. So this week we're having none other but women sharing in politics, in religion, in education, in entrepreneurship, in family and workforce. We're having all women sharing their life work. We've had some amazing, amazing people on this week, ladies. If this is your first time on today, we had Dr. McIntyre, epidemiologist, Dr. Fuller, a virologist, immunologist, Dr. Vanessa Steele. I'm not sure what she is. She's the hurricane, is what she is. She's coming from the religion. She's Reverend Doctor, but my God, she was an awesome send. And then her respondent was Dr. Latricia Scriven. Oh Lord, that's another hurricane. She represented well Black theology and womanist theology. She just wore it, and so we're thankful. We also had Charlene Bryant, attorney Charlene Bryant, who responded to Judge Biggers. That was very, I won't say a tearjerker, but it was emotional, because after we hung up the phone, Dr. Warren and I, we had a brief conversation. We didn't use profanity, but we thought it. It was very, very painful. And I really respect Dr. Steele yesterday, because after we replayed the video, she said, I have no comment. And I understood why, because the comment on the video that we saw, it was just too much. And so she just said, listen, let's just let it ride, because we saw some things in terms of law and justice that just kind of blowing our minds. Today, we have Dr. Sadie McConnell. And we have Jaleah Rutledge. You're going to tell us when you get started. Please tell us where you are in your program. We know that you graduated from Tuskegee University with your Master's in Public Health. We know that you're in Michigan. University of Michigan or Michigan State?
Michigan State.
That's nice. Dr. Warren, where did Kimberly Carr go? Should she go to Michigan State or University of Michigan?
Michigan State.
Okay. So a colleague came up there and joined you. And so we know this. And so we're very proud of you just to have you back. And then we also have, look at her, Lindsey Glenn. Let me say something about Lindsey Glenn, because she will be our moderator today. A couple years ago, she came into my office with her mother and her father. Both of them are dentists, and both of them came from Tuskegee University, or Tuskegee. Her father's from Tuskegee, and her parents came through Tuskegee University. Both of them is in Colorado. Is that where they're practicing? Like Boulder, I believe. Okay. And so I told them, I said, I'm gonna look after your young'un. And so she came to study and to be I actually joined the Bioethics Honors Program. What I love about Lindsey is this. Every time I ask a question, she says yes. If I say, I need you to be in the healthy Halloween harvest, she says yes. Whatever we ask, she is there. And Lindsey, we really, really appreciate your presence. So today you are our moderator. And so therefore it's upon you to do two things: to introduce Dr. Sadie McConnell, and then introduce Ms. Jaleah Rutledge, and after they finish, to moderate the questions that are going to be in the chat. And I'll be sitting back and watching you perform. Blessings upon you. This is our sister, Lindsey Glenn. Lindsey, take it away. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, before we go. Dr. Warren, do you have anything to say before we get started?
I just want to say amen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Lindsey?
And let me pause, though. I do have to say that Ms. Rutledge, I've watched her grow in a fantastic way. She, as they say, she's representing, and I couldn't be more proud. I can't wait to call that Dr. Rutledge. I'm going to be there.
That's wonderful.
All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. So I am Lindsey Glenn, a junior biology major with a minor in material science engineering from the Mile High city of Denver, Colorado. And thank you all for attending this workshop and this Women in Leadership Ethics and Family and Workforce Zoom call. Hopefully we can just hear from some powerful women and leaders so that we can be inspired, especially for college students, because I'm in college, you know, the semester's ending, trying to find some motivation to make sure I keep my grades up so that I can get to medical school. So hopefully the Zoom call will give me some motivation to keep going and finish strong. So first off, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. So here we have Dr. Sadie B. McConnell. She was raised and reared in Brooklyn, New York. She was one of the inaugural Master of Public Health graduates from Bethune-Cookman University with a concentration in health equity. In addition, she continues to be an active public health advocate today. She is a member of the Action Board of American Public Health Association. Furthermore, Dr. McConnell is a member of the Volusia and Flagler Counties Fetal Infant Mortality Group. Recently, she has been selected to be an ambassador for the Perinatal Safe Spot. Moreover, because of her tireless community service, she was also selected as a hometown hero at the Juneteenth program in Daytona Beach, Florida. In addition, she has been in several health fairs and community service reach out programs. Dr. McConnell received a Doctor of Podiatric Medicine from Ohio Instrumental College of Podiatric Medicine. She has received her Bachelor of Science from Winston-Salem State University, and her major was biology with a minor in chemistry. Dr. McConnell also hosts a radio show called Your Best Life on Joy 106.3 FM, where she talks with various guests about community and public health issues. She also serves as a contributing health editor for the magazine entitled Emerging Black. Please welcome Dr. Sadie B. McConnell.
Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank everyone that invited me to be the keynote speaker. In 2016, I was actually on the other side. I was actually invited to this public health ethics intensive course. And I was so impressed by the event. I always wanted to either come back and get to see it, experience it again, or to actually be on the panel. And God has his way, and here it is. So I definitely want to thank you. And I'd also be remiss if I did not thank on Veterans Day, not to thank any of us that are veterans, any of you that are veterans. I want to thank you so much for your service. All right. Thank you so much. Would you like me to go ahead and get started? Or you'd like to, okay, all right. All right. This public health, public health, okay. He's controlling it this time. So I'm gonna go, all right. The public health public health ethics intensive course of 2021, the National Center of Bioethics in Research and Healthcare. We're talking today about women, leadership, and ethics. All right. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to concentrate today on family and workforce. And we kind of know that that's been quite a turmoil for all of us women. Women take on leadership roles at home with care for family, friends. We take care of our children. We take care of our elderly. So we have taken on quite a bit. These responsibilities can take their toll on us emotionally, mentally, and physically. Next slide, please. All right. We've had to balance, just like this man right here is balancing on a rope, and it's been a tough balance, especially in 20 and 21. We've had several challenges, one being the COVID-19 disease and the effects of that disease. We've also suffered from burnout. We've also we've been doing a lot of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we as women want to diverse the workplace. And when we cause the diversity in the workplace, we want there to be equity, not equality, but equity. And we want it to be inclusive. We've had to deal with behaviors such as microaggressions. We've had to deal with othering or being the only, and I'll talk about that in a minute, being the only or even the double only. And we've also had to deal with, definitely with disrespect. I've gotten a lot of this information, received a lot of information according to the McKinsey and Company report. It's called Women in the Workplace. This is the largest study done in the United States about women in corporate America. Next slide, please. We've been mothers, caregivers. Mothers have lost about $15,000 annually because of the wage gap. You know, women, we just don't make the money, and I'll show you a graph shortly. We don't make the money that a man makes. And it usually takes about by August of the next year before a Black woman makes what a white man makes in the same job. All right, before the pandemic made everything was hard then, and now after the pandemic, it has even become more difficult. While women in the US they work full-time jobs year-round, typically get paid 82 cents for every dollar that a man makes. This fact is from March 2021. The National Women Law Center, the wage gap has robbed women of the ability to weather COVID-19. Now let's get a little bit into the workplace, a little bit more into the workplace. We talked about family, we talked about mothering and caregiving, and now talk about the workplace. COVID-19 pandemic has affected us in many, many ways. Next slide, please. The loss of women leaders. There have been lots of women that have been coming out of the corporate world, coming out of different industries because of the stress, trying to balance their work life and their family life. and it's been quite a balance. And you see by the illustration, it just can burn you out. It can burn you out physically, mentally, emotionally. A lot of women have been suffering from various conditions that have been totally related to stress. Some companies have offered some mental health services. Some have actually increased pay for leave. Some have even offered stipends to pay for the electricity at your home that you've had to use to stay at home for virtual working. Women leaders tend to mentor and they sponsor other women. Additionally, they are more supportive of equity compared to senior level men. Next slide, please. Black women, COVID-19 and the workplace. Black women have had to suffer lots of violence in COVID-19. The isolation, I'm sure you've heard in public health, isolation kills. We've had to deal with domestic violence. It has gone up, 100-fold. We've had to deal with people that have actually committed suicide, people, their mental health issues, be that depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, has been exacerbated from being isolated and being by ourselves. Black women have also had to deal with the non-existent allyship. We want somebody to be our allies, and that has been non-existent. Also during COVID-19, we know that the rate of in African-American population has been higher in death rates. We've had loss of loved ones. As unfortunately, many of us on this webinar, we've lost friends, we've lost loved ones in the last 2020, 2021, and sometimes right behind each other. And we've been excluded also from work. Black women have experienced challenges in previous years. However, they experienced more challenges because of COVID-19. As we said, domestic violence, racial violence rates. We can't forget about George Floyd. We can't forget about Ahmaud Arbery. We can't forget about Ronald Green. The rates have increased. Rates of depression and anxiety have increased due to that violence. A lot of us found out we have triggers. We can't watch the video. We can't watch that person, someone being shot for jogging. We've dealt with violence, and because of that violence, we've also had to deal with illnesses, be they mental illnesses or physical illnesses, and death. They don't feel comfortable. Most Black women, we feel excluded at work. We don't feel comfortable sharing what's been going on in our lives. Next slide, please. We've also had to deal with microaggressions at work. For example, nurse, can you find me a doctor? Do you speak English? Are there any doctors from America here? We've had to deal with that. Women of color experience microaggressions to a greater extent. For example, Black women are almost 4 times more likely than white women, 2 to 3 times more likely to hear people express a surprise of their intellect. And I have to be a witness to that as well. I've had people ask me, they couldn't believe that I knew the words that I knew, that I could speak as well as I speak. So that's been language skills. They've been questioned. Here we go with some of the, next slide, please. Some of the examples of the microaggressions. I don't think of you as, and the impact that has on you. Your colleague ends up feeling marginalized, right? It was only a joke. Don't take it so seriously. Obviously, they said something that was inappropriate and didn't consider the fact that it was inappropriate to you. Where are you really from? You don't look like you're from here. You don't look like you're that your family should be from here. Things of that nature. Or you're so articulate, as if they're surprised at that. Next slide, please. And during this time, having to deal with this, women have had to pay an emotional tax. What is that? It's defined as emotions that Asians, Latin, Indigenous, Black, and Latin women must handle when at work, because they must be on guard to protect themselves against bias. When you're constantly on guard, you're wondering, you go to a meeting and you're like, okay, what are they going to say? that may be negative towards me. And some of us in this listening, we've heard of the term weathering. If we're in public health, we have definitely heard of the term weathering. And weathering, it takes a physical toll. We take these microaggressions, we pay this emotional tax, and it literally causes our organs to actually age 6 to 7 years older than we are chronologically. So these microaggressions, we call them micro. I think they're macro aggressions. They're not small because they have such a large effect on us. Next slide, please. We deal with the onlys and double onlys. I showed you a picture. Here's one picture of former Senator Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan was a double only in lots of the meetings in Texas. She was not only Black, but she was also a woman. We have the onlys. For example, at Roosevelt's cabinet in 1938, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was the only female. So that's an only, and most of us listening, we deal with double onlys every day. Next one, please. However, we're thinking and we're pushing, just as Tuskegee University and any university in the United States, we're pushing for graduation, higher learning for women. And that higher learning, we're thinking that will help us in promoting women, excuse me, establishing a higher income and giving us opportunities. According to the National Center of Education and Digest, women of color graduating from with bachelor's degrees, except for Black women, we have a higher rate. It's definitely been in the last few years. Next slide, please. When we think about the maids or domestic workers, a lot of us come from family members that were domestic workers. And our mothers and our fathers, they worked very, very diligently for us as women to pull ourselves up. Why did they do that? For economic, they wanted us to get away from the economic inequality. They wanted us to be able to fight the racism and to be able to handle the sexism. The domestic workers are striking here in this picture due to poor working conditions. Women of color tend to have negative experiences at work. They have a higher rate of microaggressions. They are undermined professionally. They have interruption and questioning. People will interrupt you and question your competency. All right. Next slide, please. And if you look at this slide, most women of color are usually our essential workers. Okay. Women of color are usually our essential workers. They tend to be the ones that are nursing assistants, which we knew we definitely needed nursing assistants during COVID-19. And unfortunately, because of that, so many of them were infected and actually lost their lives trying to assist. A lot of women are cashiers. We see here, we divided in Black women more cashiers, customer service representatives, registered nurses, personal care givers, and elementary and middle school teachers. Next slide, please. Employment has dropped sharply in the COVID-19 labor market. Black women face the largest amount of losses. And if Black women are holding the family together, being the providers, that definitely takes a toll. I just mentioned for a second, I think about Dr. Susan Moore. Dr. Susan Moore was an internal physician, internist, and she unfortunately contracted COVID-19, was infected with that virus and lost her life. Well, she was a caregiver for her parents, and she was the mother of a son. So when she lost her life, we think about the fact not only was she affected, but her son no longer has a mother, and her parents, from what I understand, both of her parents suffer from dementia. And now who takes care of her parents like she would? They're probably, I'm sure her son, that's too much for him to handle. He's like 18 years old. They've had to be institutionalized because of that. All right. The next slide, please. We're talking about women in leadership. We've said with women leadership. Women in leadership, we have women that are executives. And these are examples of a couple of the women that I was able to find, Black women that were actually in executive positions. And we talk about there being a broken rung. And that is that that rung is on the ladder to success. Women of color in executive and leadership positions are underrepresented. Okay. Not only are they excuse me, go back, please. All right, sorry about that. That broken rung refers to the first step to leadership and management. Women of color, due to racism and racial violence, increased in the diversity and inclusion. Women are doing unrecognized work, such as helping their team members, navigating their work, and manageable workloads. Overall, the well-being of the other persons in your employment. Next slide, please. Women in healthcare was surprising to me, not somewhat surprising, then maybe somewhat not surprising, but women in healthcare are actually paid less. Although women dominate the industry, few women advance to leadership positions. Most women are nurses or nurse practitioners, but they are not in leadership positions. If the next slide, please. Even women that are in specialties, a woman physician, even in a specialty versus a man that's in a specialty, a woman will get paid less. If you look at that graph, you see women care, men making close to a primary care physician as a man, you may go close to $300,000 a year. Whereas a woman, she's making closer to $200,000 a year. She went to the same medical school with you, did the same residency, same internship, and she's still making less than a man. All right, and we look at women that are in men versus women in specialists, that maybe they're the gastroenterologist, maybe they're the endocrinologist, maybe they're the urologist. A man that's in that specialty, he's making closer to $400,000 a year, whereas the woman is still, she's about $100,000, making about $100,000 less. All right. Women physicians, right? The next, it's time to pay, next slide, please. Sorry. It's time to pay Black women what they're owed. If you look at our education, white women in high school are making about over $800 a month. Whereas you look at the Black woman with a high school diploma, she's making $586 a month. Well, we go to having some college. We look at a white one, she's making about $1,030 a month. Whereas the Black woman, look what she is, $662. She's gotten some more money, but she's still not making quite that much. Look at the Asian woman in comparison with some college, all right? Or the Hispanic woman. Well, we notice that the Black woman, she still is not getting, made the sacrifices to get an education, but she's still not making it. We look at a woman, women with bachelor's degrees. We look at the white woman with bachelor's degree, she's making $1,489. Whereas we look at the Black woman with that same bachelor's degree, she's still not even making $1,000. Okay, all right. And then we get advanced degrees, like many of us on this webinar have received advanced degrees, and a white woman's making almost $2,000 a month, and a Black woman still she's just making up to $1,000, a little bit over $1,000. And you said, well, how in the world can this happen? It happens every day. And we notice that most industries, corporate offices, companies, institutions, they don't really just have scales to really show you who's making what money. But we get behind the scenes and get the facts, and you're able to find out that there is a gap. And we know that this pandemic has definitely made that gap even larger. All right, next slide, please. We said, now we've talked about the issues with women in leadership. women that have not been able to even receive their due pay and all the different challenges that women and women of color have to deal with. How can we support Black women in the workplace? We have to first start with respect and to value Black women. How do you value them? The big incentive, pay them what they're worth. You have to address those distinct challenges. You also have to make more of an inclusive environment, inclusive culture. Black women deal with microaggressions, judgment, their judgment is questioned. They receive derogatory remarks about themselves or persons of their same ethnicity. The distinct challenges such as racism. We deal not only with racism, but we also deal with sexism. Remember those double onlys and those onlys. Not one or other. We don't deal with either racism or sexism. Normally we have to deal with both. We have to have more of an inclusive culture, more of an inclusive environment to input Black women. If there's an event occurring, make sure that we invite them. All right. That's the conclusion of my presentation. And those are my references.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions for Dr. McConnor? If you do, please drop them in the chat and we will read them off. So we'll just wait for that. Thank you so much for your talk. It's just inspiring to see how you break down basically what I'm not looking forward to, but what I have to face when I go into the medical field as a Black doctor surrounded by my white counterparts. So it just reminds me to keep going, keep pushing, regardless of the microaggressions and all the differences that I will be able to face, but I'll be making a difference.
Lindsey, introduce Miss Rutledge,
Right.
and then after we could take all the questions at the end.
Okay, great. So we'll take questions at the end, but first I would like to introduce Ms. Jaleah Rutledge. She is a 4th doctoral candidate in the Ecological Community Psychology program at Michigan State University. Her program of research focuses on racial health disparities, health equity, and health promotion among marginalized populations. More specifically, she is interested in understanding and utilizing strengths-based approaches for the promotion and protection of Black women's sexual and reproductive health. Her scholarly contributions have been recognized in drug and alcohol dependence and in AIDS and behavior. She graduated summa cum laude from Tuskegee University in 2018, where she was heavily involved as a campus leader. Throughout her graduate school matriculation, Jaleah has maintained her commitment to campus involvement as the graduate student member of the College of Social Science Dean's Advisory Board on Diversity and Inclusion, a graduate leadership fellow for the College of Social Science, steering committee member of the Alliance for Graduate Education, and the professor and leader of MSU Black Graduate Student Association. Please welcome Ms. Rutledge. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lindsey. I am so excited to be here today. So thank you, Dr. Hodge and Dr. Warren, for thinking of me. It's so surreal to be like on the other side of the table. I remember my senior year, I want to believe it was either my junior year or senior year. I attended my first intensive course, and I was just so in awe of all the different things that you get to learn and the amazing speakers that we brought in. I believe that the keynote was one of the former U.S. Surgeon Generals, and it was just amazing to hear from him. So now that I'm a part of the speaker lineup, I'm just like, wow, I'm really growing and matriculating. And so I think they wanted me to share a little bit about myself, but I think Lindsey covered it all, so I won't talk about myself anymore. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll leave my email and stuff at the end. And it was one more thing that I wanted to say. Oh, happy Veterans Day to all the veterans, all those who may have served. I don't know if my mom is on the call, but a very special happy Veterans Day to you. So Dr. McConnor, thank you so much for your presentation. I think you talked about so many important things and things that are relevant for us as women to think about as we go into the workforce. There were a few things that I think really stood out to me, and so I'm just going to kind of comment on those. So when you started off, you talked a lot about how women really bear the majority of childbearing responsibilities, and that's true. And I think one of the things that disproportionately affects women when we think about the fact that we have all of these childbearing responsibilities is the fact that the United States childcare system is honestly inadequate. I don't know if this is okay or not, but participants, if anybody wants to jump in the chat and put how many or how much you think childcare is per month on average in the United States, drop it in the chat. I just kind of want to see what people think, because when I saw the number, I don't have any children. So of course, when I saw the number, I was naturally surprised at how much it was. Oh, wow. Okay. 2 people got it right. Y'all must have looked it up. That was really quick. So yes, for infants, it is about $1,200 a month for childcare. And then for toddlers, that's about $900 a month. And so according to like federal guidelines for affordability, that's truly not even affordable. And so when you think about access to childcare, and the more likely it is for women to be able to unafford childcare, the more likely it is for them to actually not even be able to go to work at all. So that's something that you have to think about when you think about women in the workforce and even their ability to be able to work. This idea of, you have to take care of your children, and if childcare is unaffordable, that's something that prohibits you from being able to work. And even, once children go to school, they're there from 7 to 3 or 9 to 3, depending on what school district you're in. But there's also this fact that most jobs typically go until 5 p.m. So you also have to think about what's going to happen to your child after school. And a lot of after school programs, they come with additional costs. And so this can be really challenging for mothers or women who are low income to afford those services. And so oftentimes they end up relying on informal networks of childcare. So their older children taking care of their younger children, or relying on their family or their friends. And so these are all things that I think are really important to think about when it comes to women and their ability to fully engage in the workforce. Another thing that Dr. McConnor spoke about a lot was this entire COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think that has also really shifted the way that women are able to navigate work. So I'm going to start off thinking a little bit about people like myself. I work in the academic sector. And so fortunately for me, I was able to work from home, but I often think about the fact of people who have children who are now doing virtual schooling. So not only are they having to work from home, but they're also having to be teachers while they're at home. And so that's something else that over the past 2 years has really impacted women in their ability to work. And even for those who weren't able to work from home, so essential workers, we have to consider them and their situation. And so I think a lot of women, they had to quit their jobs. And fortunately, unemployment was available, but we know with the way that things are currently going, I think for some people that has actually run out, and some schools are actually still virtual. So the COVID-19 epidemic really only exacerbated some of the disparities and challenges we were already seeing when it comes to women, childcare, family life, and work. One of the other things that I think that COVID-19 really shed light on, especially when I was listening to you talk and talking about essential workers and how people have died, was this idea of paid sick leave. So currently in the United States, there is not a federal policy for paid sick leave. And so the issue with that is that it really drastically affects women because we do a lot more caretaking. And so oftentimes we end up being sick. And in the time that we do have off, again, because we're caretakers, a lot of times our time that is a lot of off, we have to use it to take care of our elders, like you mentioned, or we have to use it to take care of our children or anybody else in our immediate circle that needs to be taken care of. And so when you talked about this, the idea of sick leave is really important because, like you said, women are oftentimes in these essential roles. So they're doing things like childcare providers, they work from home, they do housekeeping, reception, just low-key a lot of low wage paying jobs. And so women are disproportionately employed by these types of positions. And so as I listen to you talk about that and how this may affect paid sick leave, I was kind of thinking like, women are often in these low wage paying jobs. I wonder why that is. And then I thought about this whole idea of socialization. So like Lindsey mentioned, I'm a psychologist. And earlier in 2020, I co-authored a book chapter on gender role socialization and how it actually affects adolescent health. So I'm going to talk a little bit about socialization now and how that actually affects women's ability to be able to work. So socialization is really just this idea of how our brains are trained to think about certain things and honestly just the way we navigate the world. And so when it comes to gender and children, it can start at a very young age. So this idea that we give girls dolls, we give boys, cars, or, you giving your son a math workbook to work on his math problems, but you give your daughter an English workbook to work on English. So little things like this cause children to develop schemas, which ultimately influence the ways that they begin to think about gender as they go throughout life. And so when you think about this, these gender beliefs then begin to affect girls and boys' beliefs about themselves and their capabilities and their interests. And so when we think about that and how children may be socialized starting from a very young age to believe certain things about themselves, I think it may not necessarily be that women are choosing to go into these, low paying jobs, but it may just be that because they're socialized this way. I am an English teacher because my entire life growing up, people told me that I wasn't necessarily good at math or science. So when it came time for me to go to college, I was too afraid to be an engineer. So things like that are all really important considerations when we think about how women navigate through life and actually end up in certain occupations. Stereotyping is another one. I was reading some research when I wrote my book chapter. It's actually true that parents of boys tend to believe that their boy son has a higher math ability than their daughters, and they believe that boys be more successful at careers in math. And so when we hold these ideas, they do affect our children, which again, ultimately begins to affect how they self-efficacy and their abilities that they have about themselves to do certain things. So when we think about like stereotyping, when we think about socialization, there's also this idea that women in the workforce actually experience gender discrimination, and it's unethical. But in line with this idea of socialization, I think women and children, as children, women also experience a bit of gender discrimination, which can also influence the way that they choose to decide to take on certain occupations. So that's my little psychological spiel on why women may end up in certain positions. So back to this idea of paid sick leave and how it may affect women. And because I'm a health disparities researcher, I now have to talk a little bit about like how this idea of workers and jobs not actually providing women with sick leave it does affect your health. And so one of the things that I think is the reality for many people in COVID is if you don't have paid sick leave, you get COVID, you really have to choose between, am I going to stay home and take care of myself, or am I going to miss out on a day's worth of wages and not be able to pay my rent or pay for childcare this month? And so because women tend to be those that work these low wage jobs, they are the ones that are disproportionately affected in having to choose between, am I going to pay my bills this month or am I going to stay home for work? And it also stems into preventative medicine. So when you think about the fact that, oh, I need to go to the doctor, but I don't have this time. I also go to the doctor to go and get, screened for breast cancer. I don't have this opportunity to go and get a pap smear. Ultimately, not having that luxury to choose between, am I going to go to work or am I going to take care of myself? It ultimately leads to some extremely costly health issues. And in some instances, it can actually be deadly. So to close this portion of my response out, I think it's really important to understand that one's ability to take care of their health, women in particular, considering all the different child rearing responsibilities that we have, in addition to working and things like that, it really should not come at the expense of income. And it's a human right. Health is a human right. The other thing that Dr. McConnor touched on that I think was particularly relevant, especially in this phase of my life, is this idea of burnout. And we heard so much about burnout during the COVID-19 epidemic, because like I kind of talked about before, people were working from home. So they were being mommy at home, they were being teacher at home, they were being boss at home. And so like Dr. McConnor said, women, especially Black women, were experiencing such drastic rates of burnout. And so what I think this pandemic really did was just expose years and years of historical inequities. And it just kind of really brought it to the forefront for a lot of people who may not have otherwise been listening. So although this pandemic, has been rough, I definitely think it has shed light on so many issues that women and marginalized people have been experiencing for so long. And it has caused folks who are empowered to actually start to begin to listen. And hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll see some changes that are actually addressing the challenges that people are expressing that they are experiencing right now. And so when I talk about Black women being burned out, I actually went to a workshop this morning on intersectionality. And so a lot of the reason that we experience burnout is because we sit at the intersection of being Black women. So we experience gender issues and gender discrimination, but we also experience racism. And so all of these things combined together, like Dr. McConnor said, especially those heightened issues of race in 2020. I think one of the things that I kept hearing going around last year was that like we're at the face of two pandemics, because, the George Floyd situation had people on edge, all this collective trauma from that was really at the forefront last year. And so people were experiencing not only like this burnout because of work, which we've been doing, since the time we turned 18, some of us even younger, but also this burnout because we are tired of seeing Black men and Black people being killed on the internet every day. So all of these things were happening all at once, which only further contributed to burnout in the workplace. And some of the other things that Dr. McConnor touched on that I think were really important was this idea that women's work goes unrecognized. So as she was talking, I was like, that's really true. So let me Google some things really quickly about like women and their work going unrecognized. And so what I saw was that women tend to engage in work that is like unpromotable. So you find that women are doing things like onboarding new employees, or in the case of academia, when I look at all the committees I'm on, I may not see that many Black people represented across the university, but when it comes to these diversity, equity, and inclusion committees, you can guess who are on them. And so even when it comes to mentoring students, like in academia, oftentimes you see women or other marginalized people who have like way higher loads of mentorship than folks of other demographic backgrounds. And so all of these things that women are doing, even like planning gatherings, right? They take a lot of time, but these are things that don't necessarily contribute to women's ability to move up the ladder. And so that's another thing that Dr. McConnor talks about, how there's this broken rung. And so women taking on these roles that are, I guess you can say, unrecognized or undervalued, are kind of contributing to this idea of why we aren't necessarily seeing women climb up the ladder. And so Dr. McConnor also talked about this idea of like an emotional tax. So being on guard because of things that you may experience in the workplace. And so as she talks about that, one of the things that I thought about was this idea of emotional labor. So in the academic space, we kind of hear that word thrown around a lot. And so emotional labor is just this idea of managing or regulating your emotions for the sake of others. And so when she mentioned all of those microaggressions, right, people making these comments to you, a lot of times, I know me personally, when people make those, I bite my tongue. And so that right there is an example of emotional labor. And after doing that for so long and after so many times, it's tiring. And so that's another thing that kind of contributes to burnout and the issues that we see causing burnout among women and Black women specifically in the workplace. Another thing one of my friends who's also a fellow Tuskegee alum, Courtney Bryant, who's an industrial organizational psychologist here at Michigan State University, she talks about this idea of authenticity and how when Black women show up to work and they're not necessarily able, or women in general aren't able to show up as their full selves at work, it kind of leads to psychological consequences, and it may also manifest in their physiological health as well. And so again, when these workspaces aren't inclusive, when these workspaces aren't welcoming for women, it does ultimately affect their health because they have to put on these masks to show up to work. And that's also tiring and contributing to burnout. And so the other thing that I wanted to briefly talk about, because I think this is super important with organizations as they start to think about, oh, we want to implement these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in our workplace. I think it's important to think about the fact that, one, we don't want to contribute to further burnout among women by, pushing these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on them. But we also really want to think about, what is our DEI practice? We just can't necessarily have a whole bunch of workshops, but we really need to think about, what are we doing to make sure that we're retaining our women workers, our Black women workers? What are we doing to make sure that our Black women workers are satisfied? Are we, like Dr. McConnell mentioned, that pay gap is huge. So if you want to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, pay Black women what they're worth, pay women what they're worth. And so I think that's something that's really important to think about when we think about Black women in the workforce, especially as DEI starts to become like a buzzword and a buzz activity. You have to really critically think about, what is going to be my practice, and move beyond just offering workshops and things, but you really need to make it apply in real life. Like, we need to see some implications. And so I think this is supposed to end at 3, so I'm going to wrap up. I know that Lindsey talked about some things that she was hoping to hear as someone who's hoping to continue on in education. And so one of the things that I've just learned about, even though I'm not technically in the workforce, but I kind of am because I'm a PhD student, when I think about this idea of burnout, when I think about this idea of women habits of balance, child rearing, and things like that, there are 2 things that I have learned that have helped me to maintain my well-being in graduate school. And so the first is from this Instagram page I actually follow. It is out of Atlanta. It's called the Nap Ministry. And their entire platform is based on this idea of rest as a form of resistance. So I encourage women, Black women, to rest. You deserve rest. And if you want to continue to push for change so that society won't continue to repeat itself, rest is really essential for envisioning change and justice. And the other thing is, sometimes you really have to say no. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And so that's one of the things I had to work on. I know you heard her mention all the different committees and stuff I was on. That was last year. This year, I said no can do, because I really you have to rest. You have to say no. It is essential for your well-being. It is essential for resisting burnout, and it is essential for balancing. And so I would like to close with a quote from the great feminist theorist, Audre Lorde. And she says that caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is an act of self-preservation, and that is an act of political welfare. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for giving us your thoughts and words. I don't know, for me personally, it helped me a lot. So basically we're going to go into questions. We already have one already, but if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat and we will go ahead and start answering them now. So our first question is, how do we become intentional about creating support services for Black women in only environments? I'm not sure whoever wants to answer that, but go ahead.
I'll try to answer that. How about that? We have to, the corporate world, because it's not me, I'm part of, the corporate world or the institution that that employs you has to include you in different, like offer you to be on different committees, be in different organizations, and actually have not only to, as Shirley Chisholm would say, not only, if you're not part of the table, I'm misquoting her, but she's basically saying that you got to be in the meeting to have a voice. And you have to be in the meeting, and they have to allow you to be in the meeting to have a voice. At the college that I teach at, I've been a member of the faculty senate for many, many years. And one of the reasons why I remain member of the senate is because I'm the only African-American faculty member here. I'm the only African-American female faculty here. And so if I step away and there won't be, that voice will be absent. And, it's just one voice, but at least it's a voice. And so it has to be, you have to more of an inclusive attitude to actually include women or women of color at the different administrative levels.
Yeah, I'd echo what Dr. McConnor says. I think that organizations or those who are in power have to be intentional about shifting that balance, that power imbalance, and redistributing power. And so in a lot of cases that may look like inviting Black women to have a seat at the table.
Let me ask a question. And this goes to both of you. What would you say to someone who says that the reason why women in general at the lower end of the pay gap is because, for example, so you take John and Jane, and they went to the same school, as you said. They graduated in the same part of their class, and they get hired at the same company. They put in the same amount of time, except Jane has a baby and she has to go home early. So while John works until 7 p.m., Jane leaves at 5. Okay. Then when it's time for pay increases, obviously the likelihood is that John will get it. Then Jane gets pregnant again. So she now have another baby. And she's out for 9 months plus 6 weeks, 12 weeks. So now she's out for essentially a year, while at the same time, John is toiling at his job. So John continues to increase in pay. Well, it seems like there's an inequity in, and when you look at it on his face, it seems like an inequity with Jane. How do you think that is? How could that be reconciled? How should we think through that? This is to both of you.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. I think it has a lot to do with the culture of work. And so one of the things that I was going to touch on, but I was like, I don't have time, is say, for instance, Jane and John, we're going to put them at a really high paying job in company who has these 60-hour work weeks. And so I think that in cases like that, yes, it is an inequity because, one, you shouldn't be expecting people to work that much anyway. You should create a culture of work where people are able to take care of their children and have a healthy home life without it actually causing them to sacrifice moving up the ladder in work. So that's what I think about that. I think we have to think about, as employers, once we start becoming employers and organizations, we have to think about the type of and the culture of work that we create and make sure we create one that allows for people to be able to be successful at home life, family life, and work.
I push back to that. 1 second, Dr. McConnor, as you think through this. I push back to that. I would think would be, well, that kind of disincentivizes the non-communistic approach. So now a person has, in a capitalistic society, he or she is driven to work harder, not just because of the income, but just driven, like Dr. Warren, he's on my left. I don't know where he is on your screen, but he's on my left. And often um, um, he's here until 10, 11 o'clock at night. Now, at the same time, he says to me, well, Doc, you know, you work through lunch anyway. And then you here until 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I live in Atlanta, then I have to drive home. So what you're saying, Ms. Rutledge, in terms of the culture of work and family, then it hits me right in my face, right? Because I need to get my behind out of the office at 4:30 and head back to Atlanta to be with my family, sure. But on the other hand, what about Dr. Warren is on campus during the week? So wouldn't your argument disincentivizes him and others who, what if you don't have a children or a family, or to just do the work because you're passionate about the work? So one way to look at it is, as you said, the kind of culture work, but another way to think about it is, what would that do to the person whose job is his family or her family? So how can we find equity in such a turbulent global system, in capitalism, I should say, capitalistic system? How do you find equity in capitalism?
I think it's quite difficult to find equity in capitalism. I don't think that capitalism was set up for equity to be possible.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
I said, I don't really know if equity is honestly truly possible, especially in terms of income in a capitalistic society. I know that sounds a little bit of Debbie Downer, but that's just kind of how I feel about it. And as a psychologist, I would say that I definitely think that it's important to be passionate about your work, but I also think that work should not be life. I think balance is important. And so to those people who may not necessarily have a family, I definitely think that they should still take a step away from work and spend time doing other things that may make themselves feel good. Or if they don't know what those are, I encourage you to find some time to find some other things that may make yourself feel good.
Okay, as Dr. Makana, I love Dr. Rutledge. Okay, Dr. Rutledge, fine. I love the notion of culture of work. Are any of you familiar with Susan Moller Oakland's book, Justice, Jen, and the Family?
Justice Done in the Family.
Justice, Jen, and the Family. She died in 2002, so it was just before that it was published. It's interesting work where she argues exactly as you all are arguing right now, and the exact same numbers. And this is 2002, so that's 20 years ago. She's arguing that the family structure, like that, these are the culture of the family is set up so that and I love Dr. McConnell, you hit the nail on the head. So what you do is you send the son to school, even in the show Chicago Med. Oh, by the way, Lindsey, you look just like that girl in Chicago Med, whatever. Dr. Sexton, Nurse Sexton. But Nurse Sexton is far more brilliant than her brother, who is insecure and not as brilliant. But as Dr. McConnell said, they sent the son to medical school and the daughter, who is brilliant, to nursing school, which is not a disparity because we know the role of nurses. So I'm not trying to show that, but I'm saying they put their money into that person who's going to have into the son because he's a son. For no other reason, he's a male. They put the money into him because we're going to have a son that's adopted. Now, what pushes along with what Dr. McConnell said, if we take that if we follow that notion to the conclusion, is that the husband in a husband-wife relationship, marital relationship, the husband would always be making the money and the wife will be at his behest. She have to watch how she talks and watch how she walks. So it creates another kind of situation in the home. So to use yes, I'm going to say it, Dr. Rutledge, speak those things that are not speak those things that are not as though they are. To use Dr. Rutledge's term, that a bad culture of the workplace can create a malignant culture in the home place, because now the husband or the man in that relationship, he then if he is misguided ethically, she has to go to him for every dollar. Now, Dr. Susan Moller Oken, her response is, perhaps, and I want your response to this, what you could think to this as Dr. McConnell's response to the other part of the question. She said, perhaps what we need to think about, Dr. Fuller just came on, she has something to say. Perhaps we should think about paying the wife, the company, part of the culture of the company should be to pay the husband or both parties, if it's a husband or wife, right? To pay both parties, rather to kind of disrupt the hegemonic system, the oppressive, imbalanced system in the home. So, because what we're seeing now, I love the culture work thing, because we're seeing how the one is slipping into the other and affecting the other with some very bad outcomes. So, Dr. McConnell, please, and Dr. Rutledge, you can continue to think about what I just said and see what you think.
Well, I'm agreeing with Ms. Rutledge that if our socialization was different, in that, because there are cultures in which men contribute much more to the household than they do in the United States, as far as health care, as far as caring for the children and for the parents, because a lot of us are kind of stuck in between two generations. We're taking care of our children and we're taking care of our parents. And if if someone's able to stay at work until 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they have children, or they have elderly that they need to take care of, somebody's taking care of it. And so if the wife is getting off at 5 or 6 o'clock, at night, and she gets home, she's got to do the children and the elderly. Whereas the person that's there, the husband or whoever it is that's there until 10, 11 o'clock, they're not worried about that responsibility. So the balance, you have to, I think that's why America, we suffer in so many ways, because we don't have that balance. We work so much more then we actually participate in our family lives, and then we wonder why the family is crumbling. I don't know about you, but I was raised with, we always had dinner together. That's like historic today. We would actually sit to have dinner, and when we'd have dinner with my mother and my father and my siblings, that's when we could discuss the day. We could discuss what was going on. We could find out, rather than parents finding out that your child has a sawed-off shotgun in their bedroom when they've killed 10 people at school. You never knew because you never went in his bedroom. You all never had any discussions about that. You drop him off at work or at school. You don't have that kind of relationship with your child. You give them presence rather than give them your presence. And that happens so often in our culture. And like she said, where the balance for capitalistic society, it's so much about the money are really having that balance. I kind of think of it when my dad used to say, people go out of their way for Mother's Day, but don't go out of their way for Father's Day. Why? Because mom was a caretaker. She raised you, she wiped your snotty nose, she went to school with you, dropped you. And with dad, dad was the provider, but was dad really involved in your life? Were they just a passive, kind of like a ghost parent? You knew they were there, but you really didn't see them much.
Okay, Dr. Hodge, I want to make sure I understood your last question before I respond. So you're asking me my thoughts about whether or not the workplace should pay men and women for their home responsibilities. Is that the question?
Yeah, along those lines. How should we? That's one way, but how should we create balance? Because the culture of work that you just referred to, or the work culture, or the corporate culture, that impacts the family culture, which is impacted already by the gender culture. Then how do we speak? How do we bring? How do we balance that out? Because in the end, women are most often on the bottom. Most often. You put it out there so nicely, that after COVID-19, going into COVID, who was at the bottom? Women. Coming out of COVID-19, who's worst off at the bottom? The last to get back to work, women. How do you find money to pay for children and child care when you're already at the bottom and you can't leave your kids to go to work? I mean, how does this play out? So anyway, so it's about trying to figure out, we try to figure out how to think about the obvious injustice in the family that spills over back and forth dialogically into the workforce.
So given that we live in a capitalistic society, I think it all kind of goes back to money. I think that if we want people to be able to afford childcare for their children so that them and their husband can go out on a date night and have some balance in their family life, you need to pay people more. I think so much of the issues and ills that we experience in society, like, yes, we have racism, yes, we have sexism, but when it comes to like the core of a lot of issues is the fact that people need more money to be able to sustain themselves. And so as long as we are not paying people what they are worth, starting in the workplace, then it's going to continue to have a trickle down effect into every aspect of their life. And so, like I said, I think it really all comes down to organizations, universities, whoever, they really need to start paying people more.
Thank you. That's a good way to balance. Miss Glenn, Lindsey.
Hello, I'm here.
You have another question in there?
So we don't have any more questions in the Q&A box, but I'm looking through the chat to see if we have any more questions.
As you look, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, as you look for that, I have a question. My question is about Naomi Osaka. I love Naomi Osaka. She took out Serena, but nevertheless, if somebody can take us Serena, Naomi Osaka is the one to do it, right? I love Naomi Osaka because when she beat Coco, she told Coco was walking off the tennis court, and she called her over. She said, "Stand by me." And they asked Coco in the media session afterwards, "How did you feel when she did that?" She said, Coco said, "I was so happy. I felt so bad as I was walking off, and when she called me over, she embraced me." That's a high level of empathy and care right there. So they asked Naomi Osaka, "Why did you do it?" He said, "Because I remember when I lost, and I felt so bad." So I could imagine she felt bad too. So I just wanted her to be by my side, so that she would still know that it's not the end of the world. Then I love Simone Biles. What she did in the Olympics by pulling out was a demonstration of taking control of her own mental health. So I said I use those two women as an example of taking control of their own mental health. So I want to get your view about what do you think about those two cases or other cases in which COVID, Xanax and Zoloft, and Dr. Fuller's right there. If she wanted to chime in, she could bless us. Xanax and Zoloft is jumping off the shelf. They're running out. In other words, these psychotherapeutic drugs is jumping off the shelf. And because of COVID, Dr. Warren said I'll never forget, Dr. Warren said the first day of COVID, do not say social distancing, say physical distancing. Social distancing will lead to social isolation, and that could wreak havoc on your mental health. I watched my son go through the pain of, he's locked in this house for a year, as so many other kids, of course, were locked in. What do you have to say? What do you have to say? What do you think about the nature of mental health in the workspace and in the family? What is your research showed you along those lines?
Are you ready? Can I answer?
Yeah, go.
Well, I'm going to tell you, being a professor, last year was havoc. And what so often we were virtual, just like everyone else. And there were times in which I'd be in the middle of lecturing for public health or in the middle of lecturing for anatomy. And I'd have students, one student just chimed in. I guess it just was overwhelming to him. He's like, he put it in the chat. I just lost my uncle, and he 2 weeks ago, and he said my grandmother's on the ventilator right now. And in the middle, of me thinking that the class is important, trying to keep us in some stability, some consciousness of some, putting our direction, our minds in another direction, we had to stop. The whole class, everybody was chatting, hi, how you doing, laughing, joking, whatever, but we all stopped. And like Dr. Warren said, and I've mentioned this on my radio show, isolation kills. We are social beings, and we cannot stop being social. When we become social, we start going into ourselves more. We start thinking more. And next thing you know, just like last year, the suicide rate was up 300%. A health professional I was just talking to yesterday, she just got a contract on a building because right now mental health counselors are in demand. I had I was part of a global women's health summit in August, and I invited a counselor that talked, she counsels children. She talked at our program about postpartum depression. Depression and the recognition of depression has gone up enormously. And I think about, I've had on my radio show, I even had the topic was the stigma of mental health in the Black community, because there is such a stigma. We don't want to go to mental health professionals. We don't trust mental health professionals because we're under the adage of don't tell nobody your business. And because but that's how we were raised. Don't talk to people about your business. But the mental health professionals, they're not going to, I've talked to my family members very, very recently and said, that mental health professional is not willing to lose their job, their license to talk about your little business. Really, they're not. They're going to, it's good, and it's so necessary for us to get some counseling, to get someone to listen to our issues, and for them to give us tools for us to deal with them. And definitely during COVID-19, when we were in isolation, when we saw George Floyd's life taken from him in the middle of the day, that hit us all in the chest. I know it did me. We thought, we cried, and, I remember TD Jakes saying, he said he cried for 3 hours. He said, because he had so many people telling him, I had so many people telling me the horrors of family members dying of COVID-19, family members that were sick, long haulers, all of that, and to deal with the fact that I'm in isolation. And for me, that isolation, unlike Jaleah, I'm trying to learn how to say no about the committees that I'm on. I haven't learned yet, but I had, I was used to being able to socialize. I no longer had that. And that made it trigger and make me recognize that, sometimes you get a little depressed, and we have to learn how to deal with it. So, I go to a counselor now, and my counselor says she goes to a counselor. And I said, I even have to, and I'm going to end right here, but I don't even understand how in the African-American community, all the traumas that we go through today in 2021, all the traumas that we have inherited, even with physiologically into our beings, and we don't go to see someone. We should be the first one knocking on the door. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you made some really important points, and even this idea of inherited trauma. So this is things that was happening well before the pandemic. And so to kind of go back to one of the things I say in the presentation, COVID-19 just brought so much stuff to light. Like, people have been struggling with mental health issues. It has long been a problem, but I think that the epidemic only heightened things. And so it's like, not only are we in the middle of a pandemic, we are created for connection. We're human beings, and people are telling us to social distance and not be around other people. So that's one thing. But then you also have like the material and the economic issues associated with the pandemic. So you have people who are losing their jobs. You have people, your loved ones, losing their lives. You have the fact that, people are losing their homes. So all of these things compounded. It was only in addition to like these inherited issues and trauma that we already have, it brought a lot of mental health issues to the forefront, which is probably why you're seeing these drugs go off the counters and being snapped up like that, because it's like, for a while we were just coping with these issues. We were coping with the trauma. But when all these other things start happening and compounding, and one thing on top of the other on top of the other, people started to look for other ways to cope. I would not necessarily recommend coping with drugs. I think it's really important for people, if you have even if you don't have the resources, I think it's important for, if you are feeling in your mental health that you need to talk to somebody. I think there are applications out there now like Talkspace. I can't think of the name of the other one, but there are so many different ways that people are trying to make therapy more accessible. And so I think that that's really important for people to utilize, because the pandemic is not over. And so who knows what the long-term effects of this thing are. So it's never too late to get into therapy. It's never too late to take care of your mental health.
Wait, is it okay to talk to your cousin? I mean, if
let me say this, I'm not a clinical psychologist.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think it's okay to talk to your cousin, but I don't think that your cousin will, unless your cousin is a psychologist or mental health professional, I don't think that they're really going to be able to give you the tools that you really need. There are lots of different companies, corporations that are paying for you to get that counseling. I'm actually looking, there's a mental health first aid training that I'm looking into to being involved in. You definitely, I wouldn't suggest you get to talk to your cousin, because by some chance your cousin may talk to another cousin or your aunt or your uncle. And it may be something that you're talking about, sexual violence that you experience. You may not want the entire family to know that. You may be talking about domestic violence that you may have experienced. You may not want the entire family to know about that. So I would talk to my trusted mental health professional to talk to go with you about your situation, what's been going on with you. For me, my suggestion would be to get someone that can definitely relate to your traumas. My mental health professional is is a female, and she's Black. So I don't have to tell her about the microaggressions that I experience. She deals with them every day as well. I don't have to tell her about being a woman and being a caretaker and a mother. She's a mother and she's a caretaker. So there's so many different things that I don't have to talk to them about. Those medications are going off the shelf because our society, we look for quick fixes. A medication is a lot quicker than sitting in front of someone and talking to them about your issues for a month or 2 months or 3 months. It's a lot quicker, but the problem with the medications, and being a physician, the medications have so many different side effects. What are the side effects of talking to a counselor, a professional counselor that knows about HIPAA violations, that's only going to tell your stuff unless they have if they are required by the law? But yes, I definitely think mental health counseling is necessary. We need to push it more in our environment. Even when Jaleah was talking about the mental health aspect, last year, JAMA magazine said that they did more liver transplants than they had ever done, because the tools that a lot of people use was alcohol to deal with it, and they tore up their livers. So we know that if the mental health is going to it has an effect on you physiologically. Like we talked about weathering. You can't deal with these microaggressions, this oppression day in, day in. Like we'll try to quiet it down, but we take it in. And it definitely has effect on us mentally, because you start to recall that teacher that said that you were going to be nothing, that you were going to be an unwed mother. That stuff carries with you, so it carries with you, and years later it carries with you.
Dr. McCauley just said something that just blew my mind. That self-medicating with alcohol and other kinds of pathological stuff that could really destroy you. So what hit me with that was a positive effect. I think there's 2 positive effects. Well, there's more than 2, but there's definitely 2 positive effects, as Jaleah was saying. One is it exposed a whole lot of weaknesses and inequities in our public health system. That was absolutely clear from early on. But a second one, and this is the benefit, there's two benefits. So additional benefit. One is, of those benefits, is that influenza went down because with all the masking, as Dr. Fuller and others pointed out the other day, with all the masking, then the less and the washing of hands and such, and the distancing, then influenza went down. So that was a good outcome. And another good outcome was families were, going back to Dr. McConnell's statement, families were able to sit at a table together. You didn't have any place to go. You had to learn how to play dominoes and what's the name, checkers and such. I love playing Monopoly and beating my kids. I love that they cry because I am absolutely elated making them bawl as Monopoly because I've never lost. So just let me know when you all are ready. Anyway, so those are those kind of positive things. So we've seen some positivity that comes as a result of the massive stuff. And the part that you said about the alcohol, people using that to fix their pain, being with their wives or with their husbands locked in like they've never been before because they used to go to work to get that stuff out of the system. I'm thinking now of hurricanes. After a hurricane, we get an immediate number, or even a tornado, whatever. We say, well, 100 people died in this hurricane. But what we do not remember is 100 people died right away. But then you had those who, like in Puerto Rico, for example, during Hurricane Maria and Irma, there were those who were diabetics and they had no access to insulin and they died. There were those who had no access to their heart medication and they died of heart attacks and strokes and all the stress that comes as a result. So what you said about those 300% increase, one of the things that those numbers of death because of COVID do not take into consideration. And therefore the level of stress that it impacts upon, and empathic stress also that it impacts upon people, is that there are other kinds of factors, not just the ones right in front of our faces. And so yes, we work from home, and yeah, initially it was you're working from home and you know you just have to get out of bed and go down to your desk and work and so on. But after a while, I said, what so I'm like, when will Tuskegee open? I need to get back to work. I want to get into my office, and then they put us on a 2-day thing. I'm like, what? Okay, I accept that. But I love going in. So there's another toxicity that comes as a result of not, and you don't see this one. You know, some of these you don't see coming. So there's some other toxicity that comes as a result. And another, what was also exposed, Jaleah, was we came to know that one of the services that the public schools rendered is that the teachers were the ones who called 911 when a child came to them abused. But now the children are home locked in abuse. And that brought about another thing, a whole nother issue. So what, and of course, Ms. Glenn put in the chat box, given what we know about that now about the children who are home with their bad parents, I'm talking about actual bad parents or bad actors of some sort, right? Could be an uncle, could be an aunt, whatever, an abusive person. Given what we now know about that, what can you tell us about, someone put in the chat box about latchkey kids. Lindsey, do you know what a latchkey kids is?
So Lindsey? I did not know, but okay, I looked it up on Google. Do you want me to look up yeah, very smart.
Exactly. Because
should I read the definition?
Please do, because this generation doesn't know what that is. So so I want to comment. Go ahead, Lindsey.
So there's a lot of definitions actually, but kind of what I gained from it is children who are left alone as a child. So I guess kind of hands-off parenting to where, for example, kids are like after school, they are always by themselves. They have to walk to and from school by themselves. They usually stay by them, you know, they have to raise themselves on their own a little bit, and their parents kind of have limited interaction with their kids. It says that a lot of adults think that Generation X, which is my generation, is latchkey. So that's kind of a short definition.
Wait, one quick question before the panelists respond to that. Please tell me what generation I'm in. I have no idea. There's millennials or generation X, Y, Z. I'm absolutely confused. So let me know somebody what generation I am. I'm a Baptist. I don't. I thought
So Generation X is actually like the generation between like the 1960s to like 1980ish.
Oh, I'm an Xer.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm Generation Z.
Like the one, I'm a Y card. All right. So please tell us, what do you think, Jaleah and Dr. Wakanda, what do you think about the latchkey kids? You already mentioned it in passing, but what would advice or what information would you give? So you talked about the workforce and parenting in that regard, but what can you give to parents right now? So a parent comes to you right now and they have a latchkey situation. Is there anything that you could offer them? And we close out. This will be our last question, unless there's another question in there.
How about some free aftercare? Because the reason why there are latchkey kids is because mom and dad are not able to get home before the child gets off the bus. And so my son, he was a latchkey kid. He actually, I left the key for him to be able to get into the house, or he had a key around his neck, and he was able to get into the house at 3 o'clock, like when the bus let him off, got off the bus, versus when I got off work, which might have been 5 o'clock, 5:30. And I did that so that I wouldn't have to pay for after school care, which was like we were talking about childcare a little bit ago. It can add up. And so free after school care would stop me from having to do that. I could actually pick him up from school. He probably could actually get his homework done during after school, and even use a tutor. And so, but the negative kind of thing is that, you're not able to talk with your child on the way back from school, which you kind of get the commune, to actually commune. As bad as I lived in Atlanta for many years, and the traffic was bad, living out in Dallas, Georgia, taking him to Marietta. But one positive thing was that we were able to talk about the day. I was even able to test him on questions and things like that on the way. But whereas, if he's getting off the bus and at home and I'm still at work, that's not going to work. So free after school care would be good. One question I have is, I can't quite figure out why childcare is so expensive. I know it's expensive, but I know the employees that work for the childcare services don't make much money. So who's making the money? Where's the expense? Just throwing that out there. I really don't know where the only place I think of is the owners of childcare services are making lots of money. That's the only thing I can come up with. Thank you.
That's a great question. I think when we think about where money is going, a lot of times in a lot of organizations, stays at the top, people tend to hoard wealth, unfortunately, in this country.
Yep.
I really don't know if I can add much to the conversation about latch and key children, but I will say that I think that I don't know if that's something that parents are shunned for. And if that is the case, I think that we should try to provide empathy. One of the things that I was thinking about when Dr. Hodge asked about, can you talk to your cousin? It's this idea of like collective healing and things like that. And so in instances where parents may not be able to show up, I think that it's really important for us to show up for each other. I mean, you know what they say, it takes a village to raise a child. And so hopefully, as society gets better, but in the meantime, I think that we can form our own communities. We can form our own collectives to be able to take care and meet the needs that we have that aren't necessarily being met by those who should be meeting them.
May I just say, it's been a fascinating discussion. And as we talk about women in leadership and ethics, you mentioned about the daycare center and why is it that the workers don't get paid, but the cost is so high. The workers don't get paid much. I have to look at that income gap that I showed on Tuesday, and the fact that if you follow the money, people do amazing things to increase profits, because that's what we can do in a society that's a capitalist society. We get rewarded for that, stocks and bonds and all that stuff. But if we look at what really works, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are working in that business are the ones who benefit, or even the people who are keeping it going are not necessarily the ones who benefit. It's the people who own. And so as people of color, as African Americans in this country, we started out not owning, right? Because many of us have legacies of enslavement. So the systems that are in place to keep those who have money to continue to get money, and those who have to struggle to move forward to not get ownership, those are those systems of inequities, those deliberate systems of inequities that are systems and institutionalized ways to keep those with money. You know, the gap is getting bigger, and that's why, because it's a capitalist society. And so we're going to have to find a way to break those systems, one by one and person by person, decision by decision. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I'll just simply add that as we may get to a place of being able to coexist with COVID, just like we coexist with influenza, the outcome of the pandemic, just like with the 2018 or the 1918 flu pandemic, is we're going to have a lot of emotional and mental issues. If you look at churches, a lot of them celebrated their 100th anniversary in 2018 and 2019 and 2020. Why is that? Because they were formed to serve a need right during and after the 1918 pandemic, influenza pandemic that spread through the world. And it's not just churches, it's religious groups, period. And so the need for people after they come out of the emergency to deal with the trauma from it will show up, and that will show up with COVID. And we're seeing some of that, and particularly hard for women of color because of all the things that were already going on. So just watch for it. It's going to happen. Hopefully there will be ways to mitigate its impact, but it is going to happen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fuller. I appreciate you chiming in on that. I kept begging you. Finally, you said something. I was about to say something else, but I'm glad you did. All right. So we're out of time now because we have another session coming up with our bioethics honors students and Dr. Kimberly Scott. I put that in our chat box if you all want to join in on that. Just click on that Zoom session because it's a different session from the webinar. But so as we close out, this is our final session of today on the panelists. And but I just want to say I want two things. Jaleah, you just as a matter of fact, that same conference you were talking to was my first one actually. With Davis Hatcher was there. That was my first. I presented there. Dr. Warren scooped me up and said, "You're not leaving," and there you go. I'm here now. And so that one. So you may have seen me there for the first time. So Jaleah, you have before you our young sister Lindsey Glenn. And she's going to be, she's going to be a doctor. And Dr. Sadie B, we have Lindsey Glenn and one of her grand bioethics honor students. I would like for each of you to give her one sentence of encouragement, given where you are on your journey. And just to tell us, especially Jaleah, like a big sister to Lindsey, who a Tuskegeeite. Right, so just give her a couple of words of encouragement, and then after that, Dr. Warren has some wonderful words for both of you.
Yeah, to Lindsey and any other students who may be on the line, I would just encourage you to stay steadfast in your journey. There are definitely going to be moments where things get a little bit difficult, where you're like, why did I decide to do this? But stay steadfast. Remember why you committed and why you decided it is that you wanted to do. And remember where you came from, and kind of use it as a way to ground yourself. So whenever you feel like you can't, or whenever you feel like you're getting too far off track, reach back out to your family, reach back out to folks like Dr. Warren and Dr. Hodge, and they will pour into you and give you the encouragement that you need to keep moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. McConnor?
Well, it's I definitely would like to encourage her because she stands on the shoulders of people like me now at this point. I've just I've pushed and pushed and pushed doors open for you to come through. You've got to come on through. It's not easy. It hasn't been easy. It probably won't get any easier. I hate to say that, but that, that's never stopped us. Never stopped Fannie Lou Hamer from pushing the right for us to vote. Never stopped Betty Shabazz for becoming a nurse practitioner and being the wife of Malcolm X, which was quite a challenge. Never stopped any of the great women. You read some of the anthologies of African-American women, of African women. It always inspired me when I was in my work on my first master's, and then working on my doctorate degree, and then working on that. It was always inspiring to know, like people, to read about Winnie Mandela, to read about such great women that definitely had much less than we had financially or physically, but were able to just push it on through. And when I almost say it's genetic. You already have it in your genes, Lindsey. It's already there in your genes. We're resilient. We stick to it. Just like we said, but in our resilience and in our stick-to-itiveness, take care of yourself. We are not superhumans. We are still human. I've learned to take to have a different definition or a different outlook when someone says that you're strong. Said, you're strong because you've had to be, but you would prefer not to have to push so hard, because it takes so much energy to do that. And that's energy that you could use to preserve your body, to preserve your mind, to preserve your soul. But you'll make it. You push through. You have such good examples with your parents. You can always look, said mom and dad, and I always look and said, if they were able to make it through, then you can. You look at Dr. Hodge, you look at Dr. Warren, you look at Dr. Fuller, and you just said, I can make it through. And I support all HBCUs. I didn't graduate from Tuskegee. I went to Winston-Salem State. I went to North Carolina Central and Bethune-Cookman University. HBCUs cannot be replaced. I think that they are so inspiring. You get to see from the janitor to the president of the college. I have a choice. I can do whatever I want to do. And that's what an HBCU did for me. So thank you. I hope I'm inspiring you a little bit.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you guys. I'm not sure if you can hear me clearly because my Wi-Fi is a little shaky right now, but thank you guys so much for this session. We're going to have to close it due to our session that's going to start at 2:45, but thank you guys for all the advice that you gave me personally too, and to everyone in the Zoom call. Hopefully this session helped you guys and inspired you to just keep moving forward and continue to be a hardworking student or adult in whatever endeavors that you decide to do. So I'll go ahead and give it to Dr. Hodge, and I'll let him close out.
Thank you very much, my dear sister Lindsey. And thank you for presenting. We really appreciate you. And now we go to Dr. Warren. Dr. Warren, it's on you, and then we move on to the BHP conversation with Vice VP Scott.
I also want to add another layer of thank you This public health ethics that we've been conducting for several years now, this is the one that's most important to me. I didn't have space to talk because there was so much powerful information coming through this series of women, particularly Black women. And I've learned to listen, and the lessons learned have been tremendous. To provide an opportunity for you all to tell your story is what we intended to do. And the stories are phenomenal. I was sharing with Dr. Hodge, we got to be sure and try to get this not only in terms of the oral tradition, but the written tradition. So we're going to encourage you all to reframe your presentations into publication. We have a peer-reviewed journal that we're going to be sure and put those comments in. Let me do what I've done in every closing session, is to offer both the keynoter and the responder a very special gift, that you can only get, let me be clear, only get at Tuskegee. Reverend Leonard coined a special coin for Tuskegee that you can only get at Tuskegee. And since he coined it several years ago, we presented a gold coin and a silver coin, Booker T. Washington coins, to our presenters, our keynoter, and our respondents. These are very special. Now, I hope you hold it as dear to you as we're holding it dear to us. And we'll have this for you. We can't pay you, wouldn't try, wouldn't insult you. We want to give this to you and you can brag about it. And I also want to, as we close, I want to applaud the Bioethics Honors Program students doing things as undergraduates that I had to do as a postdoc. So the exposure they're getting, they're ready. So if anybody's confused about tomorrow, just come to Tuskegee and talk with these students. Don't even talk to them, just watch them. And you'll know tomorrow's going to be better than today. And so again, thank you so much. And as I've said every time, Dr. Hodge is providing outstanding leadership in creating the forum for us to have this conversation. This is a special time, and we are special people. So I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm just living today. Dr. Hodge.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm on two screens because I'm starting the other one for the young people. Please feel free to join us over there. Just click on the link that's in the chat box. Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. Thank you very much, Dr. McConnell. Thank you very much, soon to be Dr. Rutledge. And of course, to our moderator, Lindsey Glenn, we appreciate you. Assalamu alaikum, peace, shalom, and we'll see you soon.